Energy 808, the cutting edge. Marco Mangelsdorf here, one of the co-hosts for this show, along with Jay Fidell and our guest, Henry Curtis. We will be talking about the Hu Honua, Hawaii Supreme Court hearing last week, and more juicy stuff. Welcome. Hello there, Jay. Hello there, Henry. Thanks so much for joining us again on Henry Curtis, Life of the Land. Always a great pleasure to have you on the show and get caught up with all kinds of juicy stuff going on in the energy world. So I'll lead this off. So we had kind of a denouement of sorts last week with this long-going saga of the proposed biomass plants up the coast here from Ilohamakua Coast near Pepekeo. That since 2008, several years after the end of that power plant in terms of burning coal, and before that it was bagasse, 2008 we started hearing about the possibility of the power plant being reborn, so to speak, this time burning a new fuel of trees that are grown along the Hamakua coast. And now here we are in 2023, by my count, 15 years later, and it all seems to come down to the Hawaii Supreme Court, the big five, the five justices, Mark Rechtenwald and the four associate justices. So, Henry, you were in that room at the UH Manoa Richardson School of Law, and you got a firsthand look and listen to the proceedings last Tuesday, I believe it was. Tell all, please, what did you take away from that? What are your juicy observations and commentary, please?
Well, it was an opportunity for all of the sides, Hu Honua, HELCO, the Public Utilities Commission, Life of Land, Tahiri Power, and the Consumer Advocate, to each make their case before the Hawaii Supreme Court, while 50 to 100 law students sat behind the presenters listening in on the conversation. I should point out there's one slight clarification. The trees may or may not come from Hamakua. Their exact location is classified information. Hu Honua has forbidden us to discuss where they're coming from.
Wow, that's kind of telling. So promising or essentially assuring or wanting to assure, trying to assure the Public Utilities Commission that if they were to sign off on a 30-year power purchase agreement, that they would find enough trees to burn over the course of 30 years, but not necessarily tell the public, the interested public, where the trees are going to come from. Do I have that right?
That's correct. If some of the plots have endangered species, have water issues, have other conditions that the public would like to know and would like to let everybody know what conditions exist on site, Hu Honua is like, not going there. We're just chopping down trees. They're coming from somewhere. You'll see the trucks arrive.
Wow. Well, so the hearing, I believe, went on for about 2 hours. I had to cut out at about 6:45, and it was still, they had the attorney for the CA, Consumer Advocate, yet to speak, Ed Knox, I believe it was. So what are your impressions? I mean, you were there, you were listening, you were watching, and you gleaned, I'm sure, a lot more than I did just getting a video feed. So I really would like to hear more.
It was scheduled for 45 minutes for each side, so a total of 90 minutes. It went for 2 hours and 17 minutes. So there were a lot of questions from the justices, and they allowed all sides to elaborate on those answers, and that's why it took longer than the hour and a half that was originally slated. I think the justices got a full introduction into all the issues. Interestingly enough, the justices could uphold the PUC decision and reject the proposal. They could reverse the PUC decision and let it go at that, or they could remand it back to the PUC for further analysis. Interestingly enough, Hu Honua's attorney said at the end, if you remand it back, please do not allow any party to introduce new evidence. And since Hu Honua has had a total lack of transparency about how they're going to plant trees as offsets, if it's remanded back to the PUC to say what is going on with the actual offsets, Hu Honua is arguing that they should not be permitted to expand on that, which is kind of a bizarre position to take.
Now, I know enough about courtroom proceedings, especially when it comes to Supreme Courts, that one should never read too much into the questions posed by the justices. Nonetheless, it is possible, at least, to glean perhaps their leanings based on the questions they ask the parties. What if anything did you glean? Let's say the first presenter, so to speak, was one Bruce Voss, who was representing Hu Honua, and it seemed to me that he was on the receiving end of kind of question after question after question after question, perhaps more so than the others. But if you tried to glean, Henry, tried to glean from the questions posed to the presenters, the attorneys, especially with Mr. Voss, what would you glean, or what did you glean in terms of leanings, if any, from the justices?
Two things sort of stuck out. First, usually the CJ doesn't open with the first set of questions, and in this one he did. The second, I think, more important thing is that Hu Honua was arguing that the only issue on the table is greenhouse gases, that greenhouse gases can be isolated from everything else. Everything else should already have been decided, and the only thing the court should be looking at is greenhouse gases. And it seemed to be that all of the justices were really not too cool to that idea. They accepted more the CA and the PUC's position that all the issues are interlinked and you can't separate one thing out from other things.
Including the cost, the proposed cost or purchase price over a 30-year period. I heard that a number of times from different justices, that they seemed to indicate that was part and parcel of the consideration, or should be, of
right.
this decision, right?
And it seems that Hu Honua will displace cleaner, cheaper renewable energy 58% of the time and displace lower emission fossil fuels 42% of the time. And so the idea that it's both high in greenhouse gases and high in costs, and that was understood by the Supreme Court.
Jay, I'll turn it over to you for what I'm sure are your magnificent brain is bursting with questions.
Well, a couple of reactions. First of all, I think the Supreme Court should be complimented for going out in the community. This is not the first time that Justice Rechtenwald has taken the court on tour. And in this case, it was at the law school, but it's been on neighbor islands. It's been hither and yon. And it brings the process of the court to the public. If we're interested in, creating public confidence in the system, this kind of thing does that. So good for him, good for them for doing this. The other thing I think it's worthy of saying is, if I look at this in the larger scheme, if I look at this, for example, somebody who's interested in energy, renewable energy, which most of the country is interested in that, aside from those who mine coal. And I look at Hawaii, supposed to be a leader in renewable energy, talking about having this big controversy over whether burning trees is renewable energy. I get a tremendous reaction. Could this be that Hawaii, a leader in renewable energy, is actually even having this conversation? And if I look from Europe, or from Asia for that matter, to Hawaii as a place that's supposed to be creating an advanced renewable energy paradigm across the state, being a leader in that area, having this conversation. I mean, it makes me wonder. It's inconsistent. That's the second point. The third point is I read the article by Paula Dobbin, who was on the show a few weeks ago, and who talked about the lobbying efforts that Hu Honua has, has been having over the past year or two, with a fellow named Kevin Johnson. Wasn't that the name, Marco?
Yes.
A lobbyist who has been all out and about, including making unannounced visits to the PUC and trying to lobby them where, in the PUC offices, in their office. That was extraordinary. And she's the one who wrote up the story, which is consistent with Henry's discussion of it, about what happened in that hearing around 2 weeks ago. And it strikes me from Henry's comments, but also from Paula Dobbin's comments, that the court was really skeptical as to what counsel for Hu Honua was saying. That the points you were mentioning, Marco, did not sit well with the court. And although I agree that you can't be sure what a court is going to do by the questions, in this case, according to Paula, they were really skeptical, and they have been skeptical, and they must be getting tired of having this ball bounce back and forth all over the system. I think the argument that Bruce Voss made, that they have $500+ million into it, really falls on deaf ears, because they've been putting more money into it. They've been trying to kind of close the deal without being able to close the deal. They can't get permission, but they put the money in anyway. Then they argue that making the investment somehow entitles them to get the permission. There's something inconsistent about that. I think the court is going to be akamai about this. I think the skepticism reflected in their questions is going to be, the core of their decision. And I would guess that the decision is going to say, no, sorry, this is the end of it. But that's just me. In any event, Henry, let me ask you, this is really important. Did his points fall on fertile ground? What did you think the court was thinking and doing? Did you see that skepticism as a serious sort of expression of how they were going to rule?
Yes, they were very skeptical. However, it's hard to read into what a court will do, because sometimes justices ask questions in one way in order to close arguments that they will then go the other way on. So it is difficult to read. But another point that did not seem to go Hu Honua's way is when Justice McKenna asked about whether Hu Honua had vested rights, that they had sunk $500 million into this without permission, without authority, and now they were saying it's built and therefore somebody has to pay us back for this. It's either going to be a contract or we're going to sue the state. And I thought McKenna was very clear in saying, how can you say that's vested interests? To which Attorney Voss said, that's an argument for another court at another time, which means that this, even when they lose, they're going to continue the fight. They have very deep pockets, and they, I guess, want to put all their lawyers and their children's lawyers and their lawyers through college, because
well, this is consistent with Paula Dobbin's last article about the deep pocket and the lobbyists and hitting every possible official with lobbying and a campaign that's gone on for years to try to get them to agree with this. And it's troubling in the sense that you say to yourself, gee, if I had enough money, if I could buy all these lobbying efforts and the full court press, if you will, I could get anything done. I can sell the Brooklyn Bridge. I can turn black to white and white to black. I can do anything in the state of Hawaii. And I think, it tells me, and maybe it's just me again, but it tells me the state of Hawaii has to have greater resilience to this sort of thing. We have to see it for what it is. We have to see it for somebody coming from the mainland and spending, oodles of money and getting whatever they want, whether it's good for us or not. That's problematic. The other thing, I want to go back to Marco's comment and your comment about the classified information aspect of where the trees are going to come from. I guess we know that it's eucalyptus. I suppose we could look around and see where eucalyptus grows, but I think eucalyptus grows in a lot of places. And query whether it's limited to eucalyptus. Maybe it's not. You mentioned classified, and I really wonder, Henry, what does that mean? Did they say they could not tell us? Did they advance a reason somewhere in that hearing to explain why they could not give us that information? Because actually, it strikes me that you, Life of the Land, and any other litigant involved, and the public should know what the environmental effects are on the environment from which they are going to take this huge number of trees over a 30-year period. Don't you think we should know? Doesn't the term EIS come into play here? Isn't there somebody who will insist on an environmental evaluation of the environment from which these trees, these mysterious classified trees, are supposed to come from?
It took us years to get any information on the location of the trees. When it finally came, they said, you start at this latitude and longitude, you move this many feet, you change that number of angles to this number of feet. And we said, come on, you must have pictures, you must have maps. And eventually they came out with maps classified to us, but they still will not produce pictures. And they told the justices that they're also planning on burning albizia and that they have a contract with the Department of Transportation. They actually have told us at the PUC that all of that is speculation. They may or may not burn invasives. They may or may not burn albizia. They may or may not get stuff from others, but none of that can be publicly or privately discussed until after they get the contract. And yet they told the justices that invasives were going to be burned at the plant, which is, as far as I can tell, an out and out error on their part.
Well, I think, it's an error for us not to know. I mean, this is really important, where those trees are coming from, how they're going to affect the environment, and why in the world is it classified. And if there's an agreement, let's see it. Let's see that agreement. Isn't that part of the due diligence involved in making a decision on this? Did the court express skepticism about that?
That particular issue was not raised at the court, although the consumer advocate, I thought, did a very good job in their final briefing, where they laid out all the different conditions that all the different parties would want answered if it ever went back to the PUC. So if they remand it, the court is going to have to give a fairly detailed analysis on exactly what the PUC is supposed to be looking at. But the court also gives great deference to agencies. They don't second guess agencies on substance. They do on process, but not on substance. And so I think they're going to give great deference to the PUC. And I think the likely outcome is Hu Honua is going to lose at the Supreme Court. But of course, that is always a gamble saying that, because courts can surprise you in many different ways.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe there's a question of national defense or national security. That's why these trees are classified. Maybe it has to do with the protection of our national secrets. I'm only joking. So did you get any idea about what would the court remand, if it did remand? What would the court ask the PUC to look into further? Because, as you mentioned, there are three options here. But if it did remand, what would it remand about?
I would imagine one thing and this is speculation, but one thing they may be interested in is much more details on the carbon offsets on the actual tree plantings. But I have a feeling it's not going to be remanded because, after all, Hu Honua wants to raise prices to emit more greenhouse gases. And that's a hard sell. And I think the court got that.
Well, it strikes me, and bottom line is, I mean, although there a very interesting article by Paula Dobbin, the main point here is there are two main points. One is, of course, what is green energy, and does green energy include biomaterial like this? I think the court is environmentally akamai about that. It's not likely to rule that way. The other is, what about the consumer, Matt? The Big Island has had rates that are way too high. This is a time when the rates could go up by 10 cents, as I recall, or down with, as Marco mentioned, it could be down with alternative sources of real green energy. Did the court express any view of that? Because consumer rates are so important, especially on the Big Island.
Yeah, I believe the courts really thought about that issue. The Supreme Court thought about that issue. And it will boil down to the first point of whether the court agrees that Hu Honua should limit it only to greenhouse gases. But I don't think the court's going to do that. So the court, it's hard to read the court. In fact, I was speaking to some law professors, asking them what they thought, and their analysis was, when we guess what the court's going to do, we're right at least half the time.
Marco, back to you.
Thanks, Jay. So, Henry, you were in the classroom, and all we saw, those of us who were watching it on the YouTube channel, the court's YouTube channel, was the individual sitting at the table, the attorney sitting at the table, and then he or she ended their time at the table after the questioning was over, and then they got up off their chair and they went to sit down. And I would like to ask you, as you watched Mr. Voss and the other attorneys, what, if anything, did you pick up in terms of looks on their face or body language after they had finished their time there in the chair and at the table?
Well, from the sort of the left side, you were looking at the center side. From the left side is where Hu Honua and Helco sat. And in the very front left seat was Warren.
Warren Lee.
Warren Lee.
Yeah.
And it appeared that Voss was not happy with the way things were going. That would be my take. On the right side were the PUC, the Consumer Advocate, Life of Land, and Tahiri. Behind us, all the way in the back, was one PUC commissioner, Naomi Kauai. And so there were also supporters on both wings, and then additional students on both wings. I think the biggest thing I got looking at the attorneys is that our side looked like we had put together as strong a case as we could, and the other side looked a little bit defeated after they were hit with questions they, I guess, did not expect.
You said supporters. You mean supporters of Hu Honua? Supporters?
No, I'm sorry. People behind us were supporters were either members of the PUC, the CA, Lifeland, Tahiri, or their allies or their backers. And on the left side were Hu Honua and Helco and some of their people.
It's the law school, and there were 100 chairs in there, 100 seats in that classroom. Did you get any idea about how the law students or the people or professors from the law school, how they felt about this?
They seemed to be fairly lawyerly.
I take that as not necessarily a compliment.
Well, no, but afterwards, when it was all over, everybody was to leave except the law students. And then the justices were going to come back and have a conversation with the law students. Obviously, you can't discuss anything that would involve any party, but you could discuss process and that kind of thing. So I did not stick around to see how long that went on or anything, but so it was a two-parter.
And
Well,
just to be
good for Mark Rechtenwald that he does this in a public forum that way. Sorry, Marco.
I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong here, Henry, but just to be absolutely clear, this case deals with whether the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission under Jay Griffin, Jenny Potter, and Leo Sunshine, whether they properly followed the instructions of what I believe is called Helco 2.
Yes.
The Helco 2 Supreme Court ruling telling the commission under Jay Griffin, thou shalt have a public hearing, and in the course of considering this PPA, thou shalt keep the following things in mind, which was actually fairly short, that particular set of instructions. So really what this case boils down to is whether the commission adequately, properly followed the instructions given in the Helco 2 decision. Do I get that right?
Correct. That it's they were looking at cost, greenhouse gases, public trust, and one other thing. But yeah,
the healthful environment, right? The healthful environment.
Yeah, prudent was the fourth one.
Okay. Now we expect a decision prior to sometime in early April, if I'm not mistaken. Is that
right?
Correct.
Mike Wilson's last day on the court is April 7th, so the decision will come out before then.
So we're two months or less away from the court ruling for the third time.
Fourth.
The fourth. What am I missing here?
Helco 3 was when Hu Honua filed to try to delay everything, and the court said no way.
I remember.
So this is actually Helco 4.
Helco 4. Okay, it reminds me of Rocky 4, except I think there are actually 5 Rocky films.
You know, Henry,
hopefully not 5 in this.
If the court agrees with Hu Honua, then presumably directly or by requiring the PUC to look at something else and set it up so that ultimately Hu Honua can proceed, then Hu Honua could go into business and it could start burning eucalyptus or whatever it is, and begin feeding, the grid in the Big Island. Okay, but on the other side, if the court blocks this and agrees with the PUC and says, we do not accept, we do not reaffirm the PUC. Okay? That's the end of it, right? And that's the end of this project, this facility, this investment. What happens? What happens to Hu Honua if the Supreme Court rules against them flat out?
They indicated that they would sue the state, I would imagine in federal court, for being unable to recover their investment. They also have a federal lawsuit against HECO for triple damages. So they have 2 opportunities for their lawyers to further enrich themselves.
But the project would be over. The
unless
job would be over.
Unless a federal court overruled the state court.
Well, let me add one thing, which is, even though, again, please correct me if I'm wrong here, Henry, even though during the course of the commission hearings last year that were ordered by the court, there was the opportunity for Hu Honua to respond to the possibility that they could submit a bid in the round three of the Big Islands or Helco's pursuit of more renewable generation. because we've now gone through RFP1, RFP2, and I'm not sure exactly where we are with RFP3, but if it's not happening now, it will happen soon. And Hu Honua said clearly and explicitly, no, we will not pursue that. But theoretically, if they were to be ruled against in this particular case, they could they not? They could theoretically submit a bid in round 3.
Yes, they could.
But
And
Henry, isn't that whole RFP process is talking about renewable energy? Could they submit a bid for burning biomass in an RFP for renewable energy? Big question.
I believe the RFP will be for both intermittent and firm power. I believe that Hu Honua would be able to bid into it. If they did bid into it, it would mean waiting for the whole process to run through. And then if they were selected as a final candidate, they would have to go back to the PUC and start the whole process all over again.
Well, they'd be in competition too, wouldn't they?
Yes.
And if their pricing in the terms of the energy agreement that they contemplate is different than others or not as good as others, they would lose the competition.
Right. As we pointed out and we expressed to the court, the Hu Honua releases 29 times or more greenhouse gases per megawatt than a solar plus storage facility does.
Wow. Well, Marco, this is very interesting stuff, and one could write books about it. And, and you divide the book into the chapters of the appeals, I suppose. Each appeal gets a different chapter. But this is quite something. And in the larger framework and the larger way of looking at it in Hawaii, it troubles me that we have so much controversy over a project that is really so questionable. How does this advance clean energy in our state? How does this help us or not help us get to our goal of 100% clean energy? It just seems to me, just in the track of history, if you will, this is one big, huge distraction.
Well, Jay, I think, and Henry kind of touched on it as well, as did you. The question of burning, in this case, burning trees that would be expressly cut down for the purpose of combusting them in a power plant for power generation, obviously. Whether that truly is the nature of greenness of green energy, right? Is it truly green? And I mean, this debate is going on in Europe as well when it comes to doing something similar, except turning them into wood pellets. How sustainable is that? Now, I am of the strong persuasion that we here on this island, we here in the state, and we collectively on the planet writ large have to accelerate our move away from combusting anything to produce power. And that goes from kind of the micro of the Big Island to the more macro of global energy trends and energy needs. But I'm firmly of the belief, and I have been really since this Hu Honua has been discussed, that we can and absolutely must do better when it comes to power generation on this island, of which I've been having the grace of living here now for 23 years, and connections going back far longer than that we must do better than cutting down living, breathing trees, regardless of any type of pledges to plant new trees. That we have to, and we can do better than burning the trees to produce power.
Well, that actually shows some light at the end of the tunnel. Although this has really been an awful experience, you could say that it's an awful experience for Hu Honua, but it's an awful experience for the state and for those who care about green energy in the state and who care about the state's green energy future, which is coming upon us soon. But what this case offers is the end of all of that. A decision by the Supreme Court and or PUC, I think it's already made at the PUC, that we don't burn things, and that we find other ways to generate clean energy. And let's just put all that aside. Let's move forward on legitimate clean energy and not burning anything. And it will be beneficial to have somebody say that and clarify it, permanently.
I almost totally agree with Marco and Jay on this. I'm not prepared to say we should end research on how to have alternatives for jet fuel. Clearly, jets combust things to move through the air. And clearly, there is some research looking at ways of doing it with less greenhouse gases. So with the exception of research into aircraft fuels, I too agree that we should not be combusting things.
Okay, Marco. Thank you very much, Henry, for this discussion. Why don't you say goodbye to Henry, Marco?
Well, this has been as I expected it would be, a very rich and juicy discussion as we've had with you before, but especially this time I feel, Henry, because it's just so pertinent. It is so important. It's so timely, all of the above. So I want to extend an invitation to you to definitely come back after Helco 4. No, Helco 5. Wow, I can't keep track anymore. Helco 4. This will be Helco 4, right?
Helco 3 was technically both an appeal and a writ of mandamus. And so it was actually 2 actions before the court, even though it's only called Helco 3. So that might mean this is Helco 4 or 4 point something.
Okay. Now we're getting too many into decimal points. Well, please do come back when Helco 4 or 4 point something is announced, and we'll do a recap of the court's written decision. And perhaps that'll be the end. But somehow in my bones, I feel it will not be.
No, it won't be the end, Marco, because after that, somebody, maybe Henry, gets to write a very lengthy book about everything that happened here. And maybe the law school initiates a course. We would call it the Ho Honua. Hu Honua. We'll call the course a study in renewable energy, Hawaii style.
Case study. There you go.
You should also be congratulated. I think you gave the first interview of Naomi Kawai as a PUC commissioner. So, congratulations.
Well, it's great to have her.
She's going to play an important role in this, isn't she?
Yes.
So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you once again, Henry, for joining us. Thank you, Jay Fidell, for being my co-host here. And until the next time, aloha and a hui ho.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.